Adorama just announced the follow-on to the wildly successful Flashpoint R2 Pro trigger for their studio lighting system. Let's take a look. You might have seen my video about a year ago when they announced this Pro version of the R2 trigger, a big improvement over the original R2 triggers that had very minimalist dials and controls. It was always fidgety, it was never really intuitive to use. It was small, it was lightweight, it was a great first start. This is a big improvement for two real reasons. It was the controls. First, the bottom half mimics the controls on all of their speed lights, which makes it really easy to figure out if you're coming from a single flash environment and you're moving to off-camera flash, then the transition's very easy. The thing that really set this apart though was this giant display with these dedicated group buttons over here to the left. And this made selecting a group, making adjustments to that group and moving on much, much faster. So I like this control. Like I said, I use it every day in my studio and out on location. So what was so broken that they had to fix it? If you take a look at the original R2 Pro against this new one that Adorama had made by Godox, you'll see that the button layout has been changed around quite significantly. Those dedicated buttons to the left for the groups have now been moved down to labeled group buttons around the jog dial, and the buttons to the left and now to the right of the display are dedicated buttons for specific purposes. When I first saw a picture of this new trigger, I thought, oh, they've gone and messed this thing up. But I tell you, I've been involved with a number of human-machine interface projects, and I tell you, there's a lot to be said about putting those buttons down closer to the next button in the process. So you select a group, you're right by the jog dial to change power levels, or you're right next to the mode button to change the mode, etc. So I think with a little muscle retraining that this layout is actually going to work out a little bit better in the end. Before you would reach up to the corner to hit the A group, and then you'd reach down to use the jog dial and hit set. And there was a little bit of movement there that I think you can probably do without moving your hand, or probably just do it with your thumb right there over those controls. I'm going to like that new group button layout once I get used to it. I really like the fact that they've taken all these functions that used to be secondary controls or second button controls on other buttons and given them all their dedicated buttons. Those HMI studies tend to show that in general, an instrument that has dedicated buttons is easier to learn, is faster to operate than digging through a bunch of menus to pull up a display that then the context buttons have some function and meaning. So I think all in all, when we get our hands on this thing and start playing with it a little bit, we're really going to enjoy working this even better. They've added some fast group management, so you can long press and double press those dedicated group buttons to perform other more common functions. I think that's going to improve things quite a bit. Those of us with older eyes really like the idea to zoom in and look at a single group large on the display. This new trigger has another option that allows you to just increase the size of the numbers within that multi-group display, so you can see it a little bit from afar, see it better in low light. They talk about a new modeling light power control. Now, I'm not sure how this is going to work, because what if you have a group that has different strobes with different kinds of modeling lights or no modeling lights at all? I'm not really sure how those are going to interact, or if it's going to work at all, unless you have the full set of the Pro line of their studio strobes that have incrementally adjustable modeling lights. Wedding shooters are really going to like this beep control by group. So not only can you, from the trigger now, turn off the beep on each of these lights by group, something you used to have to walk around and go into the menu system on each of the individual lights to ensure you turned off, but now you can do individual groups, or you can turn off all beeps all the time. So if you're a wedding shooter and it's 2 minutes before the service begins and you're not sure you walked around and turned all those things off, you can just do it quickly from the trigger. So well done there. I really like the TCM function. That's TTL convert to manual in the Pro trigger. That's where you can set your lights up initially with TTL, so I'll set a key light fill light ratio using flash exposure compensation. Once I've got, the TTL will expose that for me. I'll quickly convert that with the TCM button to the manual mode equivalent, and now I can fine tune those ratios to my liking. Not only does TCM get its own dedicated button like a lot of these functions, but you can press that thing again and roll those back to TTL if you want to reset and go again. So that's going to make that function a little bit nicer. The original Pro Trigger had this all groups update functionality embedded in the context sensitive buttons along the bottom, and that was great. You press that and then you could dial up or down the power level and it would adjust every one of the groups incrementally so they kept their relative power levels. Does that make sense? Looking forward to seeing that in its own dedicated button. And now, as you notice, those context sensitive buttons down below are kind of redundant. So I'm not sure what the final version is going to do, how they're going to repurpose those context sensitive buttons on the bottom. Hopefully they'll give us some user controls and some saved settings. That would be great for me if I had like a U1, U2, U3 button for different kind of lighting that I set up all the time. Instead of starting from scratch and setting it all up, I could just pre-populate all the groups with all their power levels and get going. Anyway, maybe wishful thinking, but we'll see what happens when we get our final copy. Here's something I'm looking forward to as well. A lot of times you just press the test fire button. Of course, all your groups go off, so you're not really exactly sure if minute changes for one of the lower lights, like a hair light or a rim light, is really making the change that you're looking for. So being able to test fire a single group out of the bunch without turning everything else off and back on again is really going to save me a lot of time dialing in the light for those extended lighting situations. I do a lot of low-key restricted light shoots, and so the studio is pretty dark and I'd have to feel around for the buttons, which I've gotten pretty used to on that R2 Pro controller because there are so many and the ones I need are pretty easy to find. This new Mark II version actually has added backlighting to those buttons. That's going to make it so much easier to find in the dark. You'll be able to make the display and the buttons right around the display always on, and then you'll be able to set the lower buttons to turn on and stay on for up to 12 seconds. They'll turn off and they'll of course kick back on if you press any button, so you can continue to work. Looking forward to using that function as well. And here's the one I'm most looking forward to trying out. When I have the camera up on a boom or some other reason I'm tethering because I need the camera up and away from me, and for safety reasons I'm not up on some crazy ladder, it's great to tether the camera and be able to adjust the camera controls and take shots. However, especially with the tilted angle of this trigger, I can't reach the buttons and I can't even see the display. It's up above the camera body, and so I really can't use it. I have to still climb up there and make changes to lighting to dial that part in. Well, guess what? This new version adds Bluetooth and an app to remotely configure those trigger settings. That's going to be fantastic. Now I'll have a tablet for my camera control, and I'll have a smartphone or another tablet for my trigger, and I can do everything, save zoom from remote or adjust the camera angles, etc. So I think that's going to be really exciting. I'm looking forward to see how well they implement it. Bluetooth is one of those things, when you implement it well, it's fantastic. When implemented poorly, well, then it's more frustrating than not having it at all. So I'm going to put all those things through their paces. I put in my preorder with Adorama. I've asked them to send me one as soon as they possibly can. Again, all these specs are preliminary, all these screenshots are preliminary. I want to thank Elvis at Flash Havoc for allowing me to use these GIFs that animate some of these points I'm trying to show you. You can check all that out in more detail on the flashhavoc.com website. If you're interested to hear and see the full review the moment I get this thing in and can put it through its paces, go ahead and like and subscribe down below and turn on that little alert button so you can get all those. I'm also going to put an affiliate link down below if you decide to pre-order or order this trigger later on. If you use that link, I get a few pennies. It doesn't cost you anything, and those few pennies eventually add up to the point where I can add more of these videos. So please do like, share, invite with your friends. For Images by Design, I'm Jim Setzer. Have a fantastic day.